All right, Kelly. So Jack Dorsey, who is the CEO of Twitter and also the CEO of Block, formerly known as Square, just decided to kill performance reviews at the company. And they did a couple of things, and I'll break it down, and then I want to get into it with you. So he said performance reviews actually don't help us get better. He said performance should be continuously evaluated and feedback should not be queued up for later. I don't think anybody disagrees with that, but we'll get into it. He also said that they're still doing employee ratings, but they've simplified it down to 3 ratings, which is basically exceeds, meets, and below. And then they're also ending PIPs. And what he said about that was they don't actually work consistently, and they often feel way too late. They don't push the manager to give feedback in a timely manner. It's lazy and often surprising that we can avoid with direct and consistent feedback. So I have a lot of takes on this. I'd love to get your take on what Block is doing right now with performance.
For sure. I mean, this is something, oh my where. This has been a thing for at least my 24 years in HR. It's been, up and down and left and right. You have Microsoft, right, years ago with big announcements around reviews. No one's really figured this out. And frankly, I'm not sure that there is one right answer. I really
agree
don't.
With that. Totally.
And then it will change, right? Things shift and change. New generations come up. Like, I don't think that the right answer is to search for and declare.
I totally agree. I don't think that there's one right answer for sure. But it kind of seems like there's just a bunch of bad answers today.
Yeah. And I remember the days when I was at Yahoo and I was young and I was writing my own, lumbering annual once a year frickin' performance review and SAP success factors, no less. And it was brutal. I mean, that's definitely the wrong answer. So maybe it's easier to start with the wrong answers, back into it. Well, but in all seriousness, I think that we've been starting with the activities, right? You start with the why. So let's create the answer based on what we want at the company that we're at and the time that we're in. And everyone starts with the form, the cadence, let's not start with the activities. And I think it will lead to a better answer that's right for each company.
So I go back to our episode with Steve, and if anyone wants a really hot take on performance reviews, go listen to the episode with Steve Cadigan, who is the former CHRO of LinkedIn. And he told us a story about all of the executives hating the performance review process. And Steve was like, great, let's throw it out. And people were like, what the fuck? What do you mean throw it out? And it's so weird that we get attached to these things that we've invented. But once we start doing them in a regular cadence, throwing them out feels so radical when it's just, if we run all these things like an experiment and look at it and it's not working. Here's my take. I think the current annual performance review process that is copied by 90% of companies optimizes for shitty managers and lawyers that are worried about liability. And so the lawyers that are worried about liability, I just think don't even listen to these people. They shouldn't be a part of the conversation. We should tell the lawyers, this is what we're doing. Help us make that happen. But I don't think that they should actually be part of the design process because they're always going to optimize for safety. So don't include them until it's really baked. Then bring them in and say, great, how does this look from your end? So that's how I think about the lawyers. Shitty managers. The only thing shitty managers, though, Kelly, is this is the thing that I think is the reason we have this process is because we use annual performance reviews as a backstop to make sure managers are delivering feedback. And I just feel like that problem can be solved 1,000 other ways that are more productive for the manager and for the employee.
Yeah. On the lawyer side, I will push back. Lawyers can actually be helpful. It's kind of like HR people. There are shitty HR people that you don't want to include in anything. And there are HR people that actually help you get there faster and think of shortcuts or ways to bend the rules. So it depends on the lawyer, man. Because
of course,
in these early stage companies, it is a bloodbath. I mean, there could be 100 lawyers in a company if you don't do it right that still can't clean up the mess. So There is that versus here's what we're doing, help us get there, because that can be a recipe for disaster. So I think it's a balance. I do. But let's talk about pips and reviews. I do agree they are crutches, enforcing functions, backstops, whatever you want to call it, to elicit behavior that we want, which is feedback and direct feedback on a regular basis. Okay. That is a skill that a lot of people, frankly, don't have at all. So I do understand that you need some kind of training wheels depending on the situation. Because that's how we work, right? You can't just get rid of them because they're stupid and shitty and expect it to happen. That's the chasm that you have to like figure out how to cross. And maybe that's, like you said, iterative steps. Maybe it's phases. It's not all or nothing or answer 1 or answer 2. Maybe it's answer 1 for 6 months. Then we're going to go to answer 2. Maybe it's answer 1 for this cohort of people. Then we're going to go graduate them. Like, we haven't really experimented with different structures in companies depending on the segment of people. It's all or nothing.
I actually I've tried it a few times. I also tested 15.5 back in the day, which is basically just like a continuous feedback tool. I found it amazing. But what I learned is when we tested it with the engineering team, they fucking hated it. And they felt like it was a bigger tax on them. And the reason why is because they were still thinking, well, I still have to do this annual review at the end of the year. And so I do think if you're going to do continuous feedback, you have to go all in on that path. Or if you're just going to do like the once a year thing, like the trade-offs are nobody's going to get feedback until it's probably too late. And so either way, there is a tax associated, but I view that tax as healthy to ensure that employees are getting feedback. Now, the biggest point I want to make, I think that there's so many managers that are managing people and they shouldn't be fucking near management. And so it doesn't matter the amount of training you can give these people. Like, you could sink tens of thousands of dollars into somebody. And the reality is they're not cut out to be a manager. And
correct.
We just want to force these people to be managers, or we create these career paths that basically the only way you can ascend is to be a manager. And the reality is most people aren't cut out for management. I always say everybody wants to be a manager until you are one. And it's like, then it sucks.
Yes.
And so I honestly think, going back to our conversation with Tomasz, I think that the future is going to look a lot more like very large spans of control, to where today you typically have, call it like somewhere between 4 and 7 direct reports. I think the future is going to look a lot more like you have like 15 to 20 direct reports, and then a hell of a lot more ICs who are actually doing work and not focused on the bullshit of managing people.
Well, yes. So small spans of control, very structured management, a lot of rules, right? That's almost like school. That's like the teacher and the child, whatever it is. So if you have great hires at the IC level that are adults, I don't care if they're entry level or senior, they're adults, they're responsible, they're achievers, they're taking learning upon themselves. They're not blaming their manager, HR, for career development. Like, they're responsible adults that are doing great work. They ask questions, they raise their hand, they say no, or I disagree. Like, all of those things. Then you have an adult as a manager who is talking like we talk, right, every day. I didn't like this. Why did you do this? Right? Direct, which is hard for people to do. But if you have that mixture, you're golden. Like, and imagine that with 10 people, and you're one of those managers, you don't need a bunch of pips and backstops and legal phrases. And it's just, but that might be, as you call me, a utopian state. Like, that doesn't exist. But that is the goal, right? That is the goal, at least for me, in cultures I try to build, teams I try to build,
absolutely
teams I try to work with. And it just kind of makes all that easier. If you don't have that, mistrust, anxiety, like lack of direct feedback.
Oh, it just sucks.
Now you've got to throw.
It's the worst working environment.
It's the worst. And it elicits where you got to throw that shit down, do a pip, and it's got to be structured. Believe me, I was at Intuit a long time ago. My job, like my first like HRBP job, entry level kind of thing, I literally wordsmith pips like half the day.
You were head of CYA?
I was head of pips, and frankly, I was pretty good at it. But It's the phrasing and the words. And when you're doing that stuff, that is a lagging indicator that something went wrong upstream. So let's solve for those upstream things.
Exactly.
And if you do that, you can use less structure downstream.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. The one thing one of the things I learned at DoorDash. So we did the thing that everyone does, which is you take your best ICs and then you promote them to managers. And then 6 months later, these people are fucking miserable and you're not getting as much output out of your team. And you're just like, what happened here?
Yeah.
So we took a step back, and what we did was we created dual paths on the career path track. So like ICs were paid as much as managers. So there wasn't salary discrepancies between the two different tracks. And the other thing we did is we created kind of this like intermediate step between the two tracks, and we called it a lead. And the idea was, look, everybody is curious about management. Like that is true. Like if you've been an IC, you don't know, like maybe I will be a good manager, maybe I won't be. And how can you create the step to where it's not as scary to test it out? And so what we did is we would basically put people that were ICs who wanted to be managers, that were high performing, that we thought had the ingredients to be a good manager, into a lead role. And the discussion was, we'll let you test this for 3 to 6 months, and we're going to give you a ton of feedback along the way. And our expectation is that you're giving us a ton of feedback on, does this give you energy or not? And if you don't like it, or we feel that you're unfit to do it, we'll just move you back to being an IC. And it's not like this like scary thing. It's just like, hey, like, let's go experiment and test.
Yeah. You have 1 foot in the pool. You can always get out. You're not in the deep end, like dying, and then you have to leave. So first of all, if you don't have dual tracks and a lead type role, you got to have that. I've known
it's a must.
I've known nothing but that for like 20 years, like 100%. And if you're not incentivizing IC equally, that's a problem because of that force function into management.
Yep.
Now, the thing I will say that is the real difficulty, and I empathize, especially with early stage companies that are just running and burning at both ends. Everything you just said is utopia, and it takes the biggest thing that people don't have in these companies is time. Like has to fucking be a tops down. This is important. Otherwise, it just won't happen, and it never gets rewarded. Never. Like, dude, make it a part of your incentive programs. Make it like a thing, because I don't think good managers get rewarded enough. And I don't think bad managers get thrown out enough.
So well said, Kelly. And just to like double down on that point, you're exactly right that like CEOs end up optimizing for like, right now we need to solve a problem.
Yeah.
And they're completely missing the forest from the trees, which is like, well, if you invest in these people, not only will they be able to solve that problem, then they're going to be able to solve the future problems. I think a lot of CEOs believe that you could just recruit your way out of all of these messes.
Yes.
And it turns out that like, you don't know what you're getting when you're recruiting.
Right.
You don't know if they're going to actually operate like you want them to as part of your culture. And so if you have people internally that you can lean on and grow and invest in, there is no better use of your time.
Yes. The amount of money and time and like, holding the business back that it takes to get rid of someone, hire someone new, ramp them up, have them understand the nuances and how the cloth is of the culture. I mean, it literally wastes millions of dollars, and people don't think about that because it's not hard money.
You can't account for it. Yeah, you can't account.
Because it's the iceberg underneath the water that no one freaking thinks. But like, Jesus, why are you missing numbers? Well, like, I'm telling you, the people in the organization, it impacts your business more than you ever know. And it's like a deadly secret weapon.
Yeah, you can't see it. You can't account for it.
But it's so real. And I will tell you, Nolan, like we talk about these on all of our segments, like how to partner with CEOs in these very aggressive, very competitive, very high pressure companies. You can't just be like, well, they don't get it. And they're like, you have to empathize. Like, of course they're under pressure. You're a CEO, right, of a company. And especially in this macro, you have to start with where they are and then move it. You can't just point at them and say you're wrong and you don't get it. There's so much pressure, and there's so much that I've felt myself in this role for 14 years with founder CEOs, multiple. Yeah. And so you have to empathize with why they're feeling like that. So I'll end my shtick with the bottom line for me with all of this stuff, pips, this, is start with the why, not the fucking activity. Don't start with changing or adding or subtracting activity.
Yep.
Start with, can you explain it on why you're doing it? Can you talk to the co-company at all hands and explain? If you can't do that easily, then don't do anything yet. Figure that out first.
And be okay with framing it as an experiment, and be okay doing shit that makes sense for you that may not make sense for Google or Facebook or any other company. It's dependent on the context of the organization in which you're working. So we'd love to hear your feedback on this. Let us know what you all are doing at your companies, and let us know if you guys want to go deeper on any specific topics.